And I see a lot of people using it in the years since it went in. And I think of the people who encounter that and are not aware of the politics at all. They're like, oh, someone in government did a good thing. It just made sense and it happened. No, not that simple. People spent a lot of time, got real angry, sent a lot of emails, pestered a lot of politicians to do the right thing. And it was so hard. And even though this seems like common sense and it's made your life better, no, a lot of people were standing in the way of this, and it took a lot of work to change.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
I'm not going to see my cat's butt, or nobody's going to see my cat's butt, right?
I hope we can see your cat's butt. I will edit your cat's butt into the episode if at all possible. Look at that. That's a cat butt. We are back on the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards, and I don't know why, but we're doing a series of episodes on St. Paul candidates for City Council in Ward 4, the Summit Avenue issue, which is just an enormous controversy of a street reconstruction. That's what this episode is about. I'm also going to be taking a bike ride with somebody named Chris in St. Paul on Summit Avenue. But today I've got Melissa Wenzel here to talk about Summit Avenue, the saga, the ongoing saga. I feel like in Minneapolis we have the 2040 plan. In St. Paul, for some reason, your big controversy is one street.
Right? Bad if it's only one street, right? Nothing else is wrong in our city.
Right. It's just this one street that is taking up everyone's time. It's endless.
Yeah.
So what? My understanding is this is a long range plan, and it has not been like finally approved or funded. Do I have what is the current status of this plan?
Yeah, so Summit Avenue, first and foremost, it's actually a utility replacement project. So people tend to forget that depending on the messaging that's been shared. So the utilities underneath the ground are over 100 years old in some cases. So it's a utility project that happens to benefit from having the same timing as a trail improvement project for the Summit Avenue bike lane. And so it's cheaper to do it that way. So again, 95% of the cost is the utility replacement and, reconstructing the road afterwards. Very little of it is about the actual bike infrastructure. So what has happened is that it's been approved by the St. Paul Planning Commission, the Parks and Rec Commission, and we're talking April and May of 2023. And that was after a year and a half of community input. It was approved by the St. Paul City Council and the mayor in 2023, May of 2023. It's been approved by the Metropolitan Council in October 2023. And all of the city council members that approved it were reelected. And in that same election in 2023, voters approved a 1% sales tax to fund the Summit Trail and other road and park improvements throughout the city. So if you think about it, there shouldn't be a holdup. Again, a lot of the funding is dedicated for the actual utility replacement, which I believe would be federal funding. I'm not sure what the timing is of getting that funding at this point. It's something that I'm sure the city is working on or have already worked out.
You're pointing out something that I noticed with, again, comparing to the 2040 plan. Approved by a 12-1 vote, the 2040 plan was. Didn't become a big election year issue. Nobody lost their seat because they voted for it. The democratic process is functioning, and nobody is paying the price for what is supposed to be apocalyptic. And yet a very small group of people with money and time, and maybe they have a friend who is a lawyer, they can hold things up in court with what I call pretend environmentalism. They don't like the bike lane, and environmental law is what they use to hold it up. It feels to me like that is what is happening here.
I would agree. But change is hard. And if people imagine change to be something big and scary and so much different because of the narrative, then I actually do understand. That's why, this is a great opportunity for us at Sustain St. Paul to get the word out about the fact that this is a utility replacement project. And I've tabled at a number of community events, just in general, just for festivals and fairs and community meetings. And when people ask us, what's your take on Summit? I start with the fact that this is an infrastructure project first, and very few people know that. Again, the messaging has not gotten out to include the majority of the narrative, or the narrative that includes the majority of what the project is. And so when people start to be like, I didn't know that, I didn't realize that it's not just about bikes. And we're like, yeah, we understand. So it's just, I don't know if it's different about the 2040 plan. I had been following it because we had similar plans here in St. Paul that were supported and haven't been controversial. So I get it.
I mean, the 2040 plan is a big, complicated thing about a whole bunch of different things. Right. And this is just one street. And so I understand that too, because we have every street project I'm not going to say they all become super controversial, but the ones that do, it's always people, they will focus in on the bike lane, and they will ignore all of the other reasons the street is being reconstructed, which is like most of the reasons, is the utilities. It's not because we want it to rip up the street and disrupt your life. It's it's a thing that we do every 50 or so years to make the infrastructure work better underground and above ground. And
or sometimes every 100 years or more, so the risk is even greater the more time passes.
St. Paul operates on an every 100-year cycle because St. Paul is magic.
That's right. Nothing ever happens. Just like 7th Street, there's no sinkhole there that was caused by utility and failure. So, I mean, I worry about that. I lead with compassion. Sustain St. Paul leads with positivity, and I worry about the future of Summit Avenue if there's a sinkhole like what we are seeing in front of Burger Mo's on 7th Street, not far from the Excel/Grand Casino Arena, whatever the new name is of the Excel Center.
And they make it about trees versus bikes every time. I've seen it here. I've seen it on Hennepin Avenue. Trees versus bikes. There's a crappy little neighborhood newspaper here called the Hill and Lake Press, and they would go on and on, issue after issue for what felt like years, talking about how all the trees were going to go away. And I'm watching the street get reconstructed now, and they're preserving many of the trees. They actually took photos of all the trees that would go away, and pictured in old Hill and Lake Press issues are trees that are now still standing. And I mean, street reconstructions will often threaten trees even without the bike lane, because you're digging up, and trees are a little bit vulnerable when that happens.
You're spot on. That is exactly what is anticipated, which is why the number of trees that the city's arborist has determined will be lost is so much lower than what the folks that live on Summit have hired an arborist to consider. That, again, we have to dig up the road to replace the utility projects, and the bike lane itself, any sort of bike infrastructure on Summit has such a shallow impact. So there's actually less likelihood that trees will be impacted solely because of the bike infrastructure. The road infrastructure to get to those utility lines where the roots have grown in and around the utilities, that's what's going to cause the majority of any lost trees. But of course, the city's going to minimize that as much as they can. Trees benefit communities. It can lower the temperature of the people who, the area by 50 degrees underneath a tree canopy. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to keep trees, and a lot of reasons why the city does too.
Right. I think bike and tree can coexist. Do you agree?
I think so too. I think they really do have a good time together being on the same street. And honestly, most of the trees that are on Summit, or at least the vast majority, are in the public right of way. So we would support Summit Avenue residents planting trees on their private property to extend the canopy or to help the tree canopy along that street.
I've been thinking for a while, we need a coalition, maybe a coalition of lawyers, kind of like the ACLU, but just for environmental lawsuits that are not about bike lanes and trees, but are about things like you've provided too much street parking, too many lanes. Why don't we have a group of lawyers who do those lawsuits? It's always about the trees and the bikes. It's always fake fights about the trees and the bikes.
That's not a bad idea. I bet we could find some lawyers that would be willing to support that.
Come on, hero lawyers, step up.
Right.
We need more pest lawyers on the good side, I think.
We'll work on that after a lot of other initiatives we're working on to stay in St. Paul.
Are there other factors that make this just the biggest issue in the world? Why is this blown up so big? Is it simply that people with money have been able to extend it and have access to levers of power that normal people on other streets don't?
Well, there's definitely concern of historic preservation, ruining the neighborhood character. And I remember when reading an article that I believe Bill Lindeke in MinPost wrote a few years ago about how bikes existed on Summit Avenue before cars did. We still have carriage houses that people own on Summit Avenue dating back to when there were horses and carriages, which also predate automobiles. So I get the whole sort of gut reaction, instant reaction of neighborhood character, but to what era and to whose benefit? And I'm going to go personal for a second. I had cancer 18 years ago, and after treatment, and of course I'm in remission and all that, I have not felt comfortable driving a car. So I've primarily have been biking because of kind of like spatial distance and peripheral vision and things like that. Nothing diagnosed, but just my own personal comfort zone. And so biking along Summit Avenue to, donate platelets, because I received a bunch of platelets. I had leukemia and was bleeding to death at one point. I feel more comfortable on a bike than I do in a car. And that's the safety for other people too. So I see this one reaction, and then I see why people want to bike in the first place. People who don't have a license yet, people who shouldn't be driving based on the other spectrum of age, people like me who have health issues where they feel safer on a bike than in a car, people that are supporting, sustainability reasons, people that want to save money, people that can't afford a car. There's just so many reasons why biking is kind of a great tool that's accessible by a lot of people. I know that a lot of people say people can't bike and have to drive, and I don't disagree with that, but there's a lot of people who feel like me safer on a bike. And so for me, I really do listen to those that are speaking up for themselves than others. Climate justice and financial savings, all the reasons that I just mentioned, those are the stories that I will focus on. And I will tell you, I used to be one of those, why do we need separated off-street bike lanes? Why can't people bike in the street? Because I feel comfortable biking in the street. And I realize how selfish that is, that I'm only thinking about myself. And so I made an active decision about 5 years ago, or probably longer, but I remember it 5 years ago, where I actively started listening to others and their reasons for something, whether it's, I don't want a bike lane on Summit, or I wish I could bike safely on Summit. I start to listen to the reasons why people do want to bike and maybe don't. And I start to focus on that. And I've testified at city council meetings, at park and rec meetings, to speak not only about my own story, but the story of others, because not everybody has time to go to a meeting. But I certainly get a lot of feedback as a bike advocate, as a co-chair of Sustain St. Paul, as a compassionate community member, and so I'm really listening to what people need and what motivates them to want to bike.
The few times that I've ridden on Summit, it becomes very clear that is a very bad bike lane.
Paint on the road really doesn't do anything to protect anybody. And we know that, a mill and overlay is probably overdue, but that's like putting frosting on a moldy cake with the infrastructure need that's going on there. So yeah, I avoid it now. I used to bike it quite a bit, but I'll even prefer the not in great shape Grand Avenue. I bike on Marshall quite a bit because there have been improvements made to the road, and I just, a lot more people are biking on Marshall sometimes, and so I'm with traffic. I'm with bike traffic at that point. So, yeah. We can make Summit better, and it'll save a lot of money in the long run if we do it with an infrastructure project than if we don't do it.
Even as like a confident, fairly knowledgeable biker like myself, I don't know. I am often uncomfortable, afraid, freaked out by some of my experiences in traffic. You could see how someone just starting out, like, should I bike? I live in this place that has a reputation for being great for biking everywhere. But do I really want to try it? Does this feel right? And I could see how it does not feel right at all for people to be out there and begin biking places when otherwise they would very much like to. It is a great way to get around. I think people recognize that only if they feel like they're not risking their lives to do it.
I used to be part of a group called Women on Bike St. Paul, organized by a nonprofit that is now part of Move Minnesota, where if women and families feel safe on bikes, then the infrastructure is likely going to be safe for everybody. And so I think about families wanting to bike with their kids on this trail system on Summit Avenue, the joy of being able to bike in an area that is very beloved in the Twin Cities and very beautiful and things like that. Like, public streets and public sideways and right-of-ways are for the public. It's for the greater good of the community and not just those that live there. And I don't want to say that callously, because of course, the infrastructure in front of our own homes does matter. But for a street that was home to bikes before cars, and one of the first actual bike lanes in the Twin Cities, it's hard not to think about what we can do better for Summit Avenue.
Right. Another thing, aside from the infrastructure that people forget about that's under the street, is that sometimes putting in a bike route that narrows the street and street reconstructions in general they improve the pedestrian environment. People who like to walk around their neighborhood, which I assume is most everyone likes to walk around their own neighborhood. I hope. Maybe not. Maybe people are going directly out to their alley, getting in their car and never experiencing their own neighborhoods outside. But I think pedestrian improvements are broadly popular. Is that also a part of this summit plan?
Absolutely. Yes. I've seen some of the drawings, and I see where there's potential benches being installed and not narrowing of the roads necessarily, but having bump outs where the car lanes are very clearly defined as one lane. You can't pass around like you see all the time. If somebody's taking a left, people are passing in the bike lane to go around a car illegally, and a car driver illegally in their car. And so, yes, we're talking pedestrian safety. We're talking road safety. When you do, like you said, when you narrow roads, you have more consistent action of driving. You have people designated on a bike lane. You have people who are in a sidewalk that are walking or pushing their kid or somebody in a wheelchair. So you have a lot more consistency, and therefore everyone is safer.
What do people need to do? Because as far as I know, this is just a bunch of people against a bike route and the reconstruction, meeting, considering a lawsuit. And how does a normal person respond? Because you can't ask your council member to put an end to this lawsuit necessarily. What do people need to do?
I think I think you can take action with city council members for those that live in St. Paul or those that recreate in St. Paul, is to reach out to the city to express your support for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Lawsuits are going to happen independent of what public comment can be. And so those things will take time to work itself out. It's going to cost the city money. So in the long run, it's going to cost those that want to be on Summit Avenue more money, and those who live on, it's just the money has to come from somewhere if we're dealing with lawsuits. But showing your support to organizations like Sustain St. Paul Bike Coalition, and directly to the city to say, I'm learning more about Summit Avenue. I want to let you know I support it. I would ride it, or I do ride it and would ride more if the infrastructure project with the bike lane moved forward.
Do you think St. Paul is in a good position on transportation, or is it moving in the right direction?
Absolutely. So I've been weighing in on the St. Paul bike plan back from when I was a Women on Bikes St. Paul spokesperson with the spoke bike wheel. Ha ha ha. Okay. It was really cute at the time, and it took me 3 years to actually realize that was a pun. Since then, there have been a lot of positive developments, not only with the plan itself, but actual implementation. So we are finally getting what downtown Minneapolis has, which is separated on off-street bike lanes within downtown St. Paul. And we're pushing to make sure that there's more connections to to those points, because if you can't get to downtown St. Paul, then it's kind of a moot point. Or if you can't get there safely, it's a moot point. But I'm actually seeing bike infrastructure happening at a faster pace than I even anticipated. And I'm an optimist. So when streets are being reconstructed in downtown St. Paul, I'm seeing bike lanes go on them. And I don't believe that in some of the initial plans dating back to 2016, when the first plan was passed, I don't recall those being actually part of those plans. So I'm actually seeing above and beyond development because it makes sense. Give people an option to find a safe way to bike within downtown and to make those connections to downtown, but also around the rest of the city too. There's improvements being made all across the city, like Como Avenue, and Johnson Boulevard, which was the final portion of the Grand Round of St. Paul. So yes, we're definitely seeing improvements.
Is there anything that I haven't covered that you want to talk about here today?
I remember when I was riding on the St. Paul Bike Classic with somebody who had not been on part of the trail, the Johnson Avenue, Johnson Parkway Trail, just marveling about it, how wonderful it is, and things like that. And I lived on the east side at the time of the development, where it was actually federal funding, so it wasn't even going to directly cost folks in St. Paul money. And I said, think about it. I and others had to advocate for the Johnson Parkway regional trail. Think about every other trail that exists. This person lives in Stillwater, so I imagine the Gateway Trail is probably no exception. People had to advocate for that. And I said, probably every bike infrastructure we have, somebody had to advocate for it. Lots of somebody's had to. So to me, because this is such a constant battle, it's just the next thing. It's a big thing, and there's a lot of people with a lot of money against it, but there's a lot of people with a lot of reasons why this makes sense from so many perspectives that are speaking up for it. And so I think the logic is there for the city to recognize what the needs are, not for just now, but for the future. This is not just for those that live in this area now or want to recreate on it now. This is planning for the next 100 years if we're replacing utilities for, every 100 years or so. So I'm heartened by the fact that I've seen so much development since our bike plan happened, and seeing that there are so many more people that want to bike if they are given safe infrastructure. So I'm thinking this is going to prevail. We're going to have bike infrastructure once the utility project starts. I think it's going to happen.
I think about that political dynamic that you're talking about a lot, because I advocate for improvements here in Minneapolis to streets. And
I figured maybe Bryant Avenue, perhaps.
Yeah, Bryant Avenue, Lyndale Avenue. We had a 4-3 conversion on Lyndale Avenue near where I live. And so now there's a median with flashers, and it's 2 lanes at that point in the street, whereas it used to be 4. And it was basically, even for a young, strapping, muscular man like myself, impossible to cross safely.
Yeah.
And
right.
Now I can, and I see a lot of people using it in the years since it went in. And I think of the people who encounter that and are not aware of the politics at all. They're like, oh, someone in government did a good thing. It just made sense and it happened. I'm having this imaginary conversation with that person and saying, no, not that simple. People spent a lot of time, got real angry, sent a lot of emails, pestered a lot of politicians to do the right thing. And it was so hard. And even though this seems like common sense and it's made your life better, no, a lot of people were standing in the way of this, and it took a lot of work to change. And I don't know, you can't force people to pay attention or fight like hell to make their streets safer, but
right.
I don't know. City, it's why local politics is so important, and getting involved and knowing who you're voting for, and voting for pro-transit, pro-safe streets, local elected officials is so important, because this work is so hard, and it becomes easier when you elect champions to office. I
would agree. Everything that we work towards does often take a fight, whether it's organics pickup, which Minneapolis has that St. Paul doesn't, but we're on the list. It's happening. We'll be the last city of the 2 counties to have it. Whether we're talking, I had a list in my head and I've forgotten them all, but every single sort of initiative that we move towards likely took people to fight. And that's a global thing. That's not even unique to Minneapolis or St. Paul, obviously. But I kind of like it when people take it for granted. They realize it's a good thing. They realize it's a staple at that point. And the hard work that it took to get that, whether it's a safe bike lane or organized trash or recycling pickup or all the things that we now, you and I and others of our age take for granted, others had to work towards it. And I'm not going to give up. So even knowing that there's going to be future things that I'm going to have to advocate for and fight for, that's okay. That's just, I have the time and the ambition and the mindset to be able to work towards things and advocate for things. I'll do it. And honestly, almost everything that Sustain St. Paul has advocated for, we've won. So we have a really good track record. And that's also why I'm pretty optimistic right now on Summit Avenue.
I just want to rub all the things we take for granted in the faces of the people who opposed it. What now? You really want to go back to the way it was before? I just want to rub it in their faces. Yeah. Why aren't you saying anything now? Huh? Talk about Bryan Avenue now. You want to go back to the potholes and that wide street and no boulevard and no trees. You really want to go back to that? I don't think you do, and that's why you're silent and you won't say anything anymore. I want to rub it in their faces.
Yeah, same with the naysayers to these community meetings for the Johnson Parkway Bike Boulevard that, I biked in the middle of winter to attend that public meeting to share my perspective. Oh, nobody else bikes around here. Oh, yeah, I bike through it. Yeah, I do. I biked here, to this community meeting. So yeah, it's certainly easy to fall back on the, we were right, you were wrong. But for me, I just don't have time because I'm moving on to the next big thing or supporting the next initiative that others care about. So yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny that it's very silent, and that also indicates that something actually worked well because there isn't opposition of this sucks, this is horrible, just like we predicted. Oh, right. This is actually really great, and I'm going to silently appreciate it and not tell anybody I was wrong.
Well, Melissa Wenzel, thank you for coming on the Wedge Live podcast to talk to me about Summit Avenue and St. Paul. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.